Hello, everyone, and welcome to Diversity Matters, where we explore all things diversity, equity, and inclusion related. I'm your host, Oscar Holmes IV, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Joseph Gladstone to the guest chair today as we talk about raising Native Americans' voices. He is a member of the Blackfeet tribe and a Nez Perce descendant. Dr. Gladstone received his PhD in Business Administration from New Mexico State University, and his scholarship explores culturally relevant management education, notably the intersection of Western influence management science and Native American and Indigenous peoples' cultures, and management education strategies utilizing cooperative extension services. His internationally recognized work explores transplanar wisdom, a foundational Native American and Indigenous philosophy, and its influences on organizational management, efficiency, and ethics, and has been published in numerous reputable management outlets. Additionally, he founded the Native and Indigenous Peoples Caucus in the Academy of Management and is a founding member of the Native American Business Scholars Working Group. Currently, he is an associate professor at Washington State University's Carson College of Business. Dr. Gladstone, welcome to Diversity Matters.
Thank you.
We'll be back after a quick word from our sponsors.
I believe that the PhD project is important to myself and other students for a plethora of reasons. I've often struggled in certain organizations where I was tolerated but not celebrated. And I met so many amazing people, successful people, Native American, Latino, African American, and they were all interested in the same thing. But the PhD project provides kind of like a resource, a platform for us to collectively come together on this journey. That's one of the reasons I love the PhD project, is because of the consistent support that they give to all of us.
I have had the pleasure of knowing Joe since we were both PhD students, as we were both members of the Management Doctoral Student Association of the PhD Project. It is not hyperbole for me to say that I have only met and befriended so many Native Americans because of the PhD Project, and for that I am truly grateful. It is also not hyperbole when you say Native American and the PhD Project in the same sentence that most people immediately think about you, Dr. Joe Gladstone, as you have been such a wonderful ambassador for Native peoples and the PhD Project. So I'm really excited about our conversation today. So Joe, let's get started.
Thank you very much.
So can you share a little bit about your background and how your cultural heritage has influenced your personal and professional journey?
Oh, it's a really good question to ask. What have I done in my life? That's basically when you're thinking about background and cultural heritage, the question makes me think about, what the old timers have asked, or they have questions they asked us and that we're supposed to reflect on and ask. And first question is, who are you? The second one is, where are you from? Next one is, where are you going? And then the last one is where you want to go? And so a question, asking my background, my cultural heritage is kind of like that. It's like, who am I? And so my background, I could give it to you in the Native American way, but I know we have a limited time on the podcast, so I'll give you an abbreviated version. And that's, who am I? Born, Joseph Gladstone, my dad's Blackfeet, an enrolled member of the Blackfeet tribe. My mom's Nez Perce, an enrolled member of that tribe. When I was born, I was enrolled in my dad's tribe, so I'm a member of the Blackfeet tribe of Montana. Yeah, but my mom being Nez Perce, of course, makes me a Nez Perce descendant. And I grew up in the city, so I'm what you would call an urban Indian, because my mom and my dad had left their respective reservations in Montana and Idaho, and they met in Seattle, Washington. And so that's where my brothers and I were born. Having been born native, though, and growing up in a city, it was really interesting because I grew up around extended family who had also moved to Seattle, and then we hung out with the Native American communities. I guess I was blessed in a way because I was being a Native American in a city, being an urban American Indian, gave me a very good, diverse perspective of tribes. Because not only did, I grow up within my dad's tribe exclusively or my mom's tribe exclusively, grew up among tribes within the Seattle region. And there's a number of them in that area. And then I also traveled back home to the respective reservations, my dad's reservation and my mom's reservation. So I got to see both the urban experience and the rural experiences. And so those backgrounds just made me actually, I feel quite broad in my perspective of seeing Native American people. So not just one tribe. It's one thing when you think about Native Americans is a lot of people think of Native Americans as just one general trope. but there are over 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States. And that's just those that the United States actually acknowledges as being tribes. There are also tribes who are not federally recognized, a number of those tribes. And so you have a very diverse community. When we're talking an issue of diversity matters, and you're talking Native Americans, you have to think about the diversity of Native Americans alone. Those on the East Coast are far different than those in the Pacific Northwest, who are far different than those in the Southwest, and the Southeast, and then those in the middle, the Plains. And so my background through my life, both growing up and then my work experiences working with tribes, has given me a very broad understanding about the differences in Native American culture, but also seeing what's common. We'll talk about it a little bit later when we talk about transplanter wisdom, where these things sort of fit. And so this influence then of all this diversity of being Native, and also, mind you, I'm also part white. So I got kind of, we like to say, walk in both worlds. I've experienced both sides. Growing up in the city, I grew up a lot among other people besides just Native Americans. I grew up in a African American neighborhood in this city, the center of Seattle Central area. And so very large African American community. I grew up in that area, exposed to that culture. And then I went to private schools. And so white culture is everything else. So when you think about who I am, where I've come from, those questions, it's just, I have a lot of experience, a lot of different people, but it's given me a deeper understanding of how people see the world. And that's what we're looking at when you look at diversity. It's just, how do other people see their world? How do they experience that world? And then how do they manage to exist and navigate within it? And so that influence on my professional journey has definitely led to me being a professor and looking at education and how people see different things and being very respectful, recognizing and being very respectful of people's experiences, and then helping them draw on their own experiences to advance their understanding of the world they live in.
Excellent. And I'm glad that you brought up just how much diversity there is within Native American people in the United States, because that's an important point that we want to overstate on this podcast. You said so many things, and we're going to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities, but I want you to go back to what you mentioned earlier about your own enrollment in tribes, as well as life on a reservation. Again, you're not speaking for every Native person, but I imagine many of the listeners, they don't necessarily know much about Native Americans at all, perhaps, and they tune in to learn some things, right? And so could you talk about what it means to be able to either choose enrollment into a particular tribe, as well as, again, what life may be like for some people on reservations, just to educate listeners?
Well, you mentioned, choose enrollment, and that's an interesting thing because I didn't choose my enrollment. My parents chose it for me. It's the question is, even though I was enrolled Blackfeet, and majority of my cousins I grew up with were on the Blackfeet side of the family, because those were the family that moved to the city. I did visit my cousins on the Nez Perce side and been to those areas. But some people can choose their enrollment, it turns out. And so, but again, it varies from tribe to tribe. And each tribe has their different rules for enrollment, especially today. A lot of the tribes are asserting their sovereignty. And so the United States Constitution actually clearly states that the Indian tribes are sovereign states. And they did so in the Constitution, when they say that the United States Congress shall have the authority to do commerce with foreign nations and the Indian tribes. That very statement there is understood as tribal sovereignty. And so the tribes being sovereign states, sovereign nations in their own right, they get to choose enrollment. And enrollment is simply citizenship. And so the Blackfeet tribe and a lot of tribes today have what they call quarter degree or blood quantum. And so it generally had to be 1/4 blood of that specific tribe to be enrolled in that tribe. And so I have enough blood quantum, I could be enrolled in either Blackfeet or Nez Perce. But my parents had placed me in Dad's tribe when I was young, which is interesting because it's my mom's tribe now that actually has the very functional, successful casino compared to the tribe that I'm enrolled in. But I can't switch. I got locked in at age, I think if I understood the rules right, up until age 18, I could have moved over to my mom's tribe, but I could only enroll in one tribe at a time. But most people don't choose their enrollment. Usually it's chosen by the parent. And then again, it varies from tribe to tribe. Some tribes have much more stringent enrollment rules, and some are pure descendancy. But those seem to change all the time. But then living on the reservation, again, this is another thing about the diversity. Different reservations have different experiences. The Blackfeet tribe is a very rural reservation. It is in Montana. And Montana is the fourth largest state in the Union. It's gigantic. And of that, there's about a little more than 1 million people in that entire state. So it's very rural. The Blackfeet tribe is tucked up against the corner of Glacier National Park along the Rocky Mountains on the east side, and it sits on the U.S.-Canada border. The Blackfeet people are actually divided by that border. My grandfather is a Blackfeet, but he's a Blackfeet from the north side of the border, the Kainai, the blood tribe. My grandmother is right on the border, so her family line actually straddles that line. She just happened to be in the USA when they did enrollment. And that's why we're U.S. Blackfeet. But that tribe is very small in terms of actual population on this reservation. The reservation, I think, would be about the size of Rhode Island, probably a little bit bigger than Rhode Island. I think you can easily jam Rhode Island in it. But it's only got a few thousand people. We do have a very small casino. Right now, I think the weather forecast calls for snow on the res this week. And so it's pretty inaccessible. So it's not a very successful casino. Though for a casino to work, you need to have a customer base. And so the life on that reservation is that of a rural life, not a very strong economy. A lot of the money is a transfer economy, so reliant on federal funding of some sort, either through the employers or through grants. And there's, some entrepreneurial activities going on, but again, still for entrepreneurship to work, you need to have a customer base. So that's life there would be pretty much akin to any kind of rural community, native or non-native. Basically, it's isolated, small economies, not a lot of transportation opportunities to get around. And so what you would expect to coming out of that. But then you have some reservations that are in very good locations. The Tulalip tribe, which is just a tribe just north of where I work at Washington State University in the Everett campus, smack dab in urban area. It's got a major interstate that connects two major cities. There, not only do they have a large gaming operation, they actually have other commercial ventures. And so their life is actually fairly comfortable because, again, location. They have very good access to money that they bring in, and they're able to distribute it to the tribes. And so life on reservations versus urban environments, the reservations in an urban environment, they're going to see the benefits of being in that urban environment. But if it's a reservation in a rural area, they're going to see what you expect of any rural community.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us. So I'm going to take us back to, again, how we met, which is the PhD project. I've mentioned several times in this podcast how much the PhD project has influenced my life and has allowed me to not only work in a career that is just beyond my wildest dreams, but also meet so many wonderful people who are now my friends. And so can you tell us what the PhD project means to you?
Oh, it means a lot to me. I fully embrace its mission. That the day I first went to a PhD project conference, and just for viewers who are not familiar, PhD project has kind of two major phases to it. The recruiting phase and what I call the Chicago conference, an annual conference where people who are contemplating getting a PhD are invited to go to and learn what a PhD is about and how to get into a PhD program. That was my very first experience with the PhD project. I met a couple of other Native people that were interested, and that was the one who went on board on that. But I learned from them so much about trying to get a PhD and what the job actually entails was quite enlightening, and it made the process much easier. I share this story, you probably heard it already, but for your listeners, I had actually decided to get a business PhD because of things I saw when I was working for the tribes. And I realized that in order to address the greater economic problems, I worked in public health. I worked in public health before becoming a business professor. What I saw were symptoms of greater economic problems. So anything regarding the poor health conditions, be it diabetes, which I specifically worked in, social issues, just many issues. We're always tied to poor economies. And I decided that my calling was to let's do something about these economies. And business seemed to be the most appropriate way to go, studying business. So I knew I needed to get a PhD in business. But the next step on what to do was a little bit challenging. And call it divine intervention. But the day after I decided to go for my PhD, my monthly newsletter called Winds of Change, which is from the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. And it came in the mail the very next day after I said, I'm getting a PhD. And then I asked myself, what next? Well, when I opened up the mailbox, saw Winds of Change, I opened it up, and the very first thing I saw on that very first page was a full page ad from PhD Project. And it said, have you thought about becoming a business professor? And I was like,
Wow.
yeah, just like yesterday. And so I went to the conference. They validated everything I had already assumed. And then they connected me to the schools that I was very interested in. And one they connected me to was one where I ended up getting my PhD, New Mexico State University. And I liked them because they're the ones who are very interested in my area of American Indians. I didn't come from business before. I worked in public health and social services. And so learning business academia was a big learning curve for me. And NMSU was very interested in my questions about American Indians, and they're the ones who accepted me. And so that's where I ended up going. So the PhD project, for one, helped me get in. But two, as I spent time doing the DSAs and learning about the mission and how much the program helps in building minority business professors, the mission is for us to be in front of the classroom to help minority students be successful in college. And I embrace that mission. For us to build economies, we need to have money. In order for us to do a very good job at getting money, business is the area you go to. Again, I have bias in that area. But when it comes to getting money, how do you make money? How do you manage money? How do you account for the money? Anything you need to do, it's all about business. And so a lot of minority students need to learn these skills. And with them having a professor who looks like them, they're more inclined to stay in class. And I found this to be true over the years that I've been teaching. I've gotten a lot of good feedback from students who appreciate the fact that I am who I am in front of the classroom, and I make business very real for them, and they end up graduating. So what's the PhD project mean for me? Everything.
Excellent. And I concur with you, considering I did have the exact same story about how I came up with the PhD project, but I too had already decided to do a PhD in business. And it almost seemed like divine intervention when I got rejected from all of the programs that I applied to my first time around. And then I was just Googling and came upon a PhD project. And it's like, oh, let me go to the Chicago conference, right, to see what I did wrong. And it has been a blessing and godsend ever since then. And so I appreciate hearing more and more stories about how people got connected to the PhD project. And all of us share the same through line about how impactful it has been on our lives. So I appreciate you sharing your story once again with us. And so many times we get into this field because we want to improve not only society at large, but particularly improve life in our communities. And so in the area of DEI, one of the things that as a consultant, many people come and ask me about when it comes to Native Americans is this idea of land acknowledgement. And I'm sure you probably get it as well. And so I would just like to know if you could take time to tell us your take on it. Should organizations do it? Should they not do it? Why and why not?
I'm going to have to throw out that qualifier. The opinions that I state here are mine and don't represent all of Indian country
Exactly.
in general.
Exactly.
So I'll throw that out there. That's important. I actually like them. I have colleagues who think otherwise. They think it's, petty and it's trite and stuff. And for some places it is. But, again, when you asked me earlier about growing up and meeting people and everything, and I found that I do meet people who are very sincere about land acknowledgements. They recognize that the lands that they occupy they're occupying. Some of these lands were never ceded, or if they were ceded through violence. And so people who do land acknowledgements in there and their sincerity, I highly respect and honor. I thank them for considering that. Others nowadays, it almost seems like we have to do it now, but we don't understand. So when it comes to doing a land acknowledgement, the very first thing you should do is not, should we do a land acknowledgement? But it's more like, why should we do it? Why is it important to do this? What gain do we get from doing this? And gets more to the business pragmatics, right? What do we get out of it? And it's very strong for diversity. It could be good for branding. I mean, some people, if you have a customer base that highly respects Native people and you want to sell to them, I would definitely do the land acknowledgement. But if it's your own cultural values and it's important that you recognize the people who existed before you were there, it's very respectful and honors, and you would definitely get my thanks for doing it for those reasons. So I get called on to do land acknowledgements, which is to be expected. The key thing when you're doing a land acknowledgement is, one, be totally sincere, recognize, learn who the people were that lived on the land before you were there. And even Native people, we have always done land acknowledgements. The traditional land acknowledgement has come from Native people, actually. And when we go into an area as a guest, generally, we acknowledge that we're not on our turf anymore. We're on your turf. And we honor and respect your turf, and we honor and respect all the people who have lived on your turf before. And so that's one part of it. The second is that we acknowledge that this is your land, you're in control of it. We respect whatever rules you have. And then the third part of that is to honor and respect those who will come after us, and that we want to protect this land and it'll be available for them for their use. And so those are the parts of the land acknowledgement. And so what's going on in corporate America is a lot of people are doing the land acknowledgements, but they really don't understand those three major parts, and especially the spiritual aspect of it. Land acknowledgements are much more spiritual than they are political because of this concept of Native American animacy. Everything is living, everything has a spirit. Therefore, all the people who had lived on the land before us, their spirit is still here with us, and we acknowledge them. Your spirit of you being here on this moment, you have your unique values, we honor that. And then the spirits who we have yet to meet, we acknowledge them. And so those are the land acknowledgements. So yeah, I like land acknowledgements if they're done properly. And if an organization is totally sincere in what they're doing. But if they're doing it just because they have to, then is it really a land acknowledgement? I don't think so.
Thank you so much for just that deep knowledge about that. And if I could, I want to just push a little bit more, because I get these questions all the time as well, in terms of how do we know if an organization is sincere in their acknowledgement? What I'm hearing from you is like a both and approach, right? So if you're doing a land acknowledgement, then you'll probably want to see something else that they're doing for Native American people. But again, since we have you, one of the experts on the topic here, I want our listeners to hear directly from you. How can an organization judge their level of sincerity?
This is definitely a business ethics class. How does an organization judge its level of sincerity? Well, one, are they actually doing anything about it? I mean, that's the key thing. Do they even recognize what they're doing? And then two, this is where a lot of my Native colleagues kind of kick in. Is one thing, it's nice to acknowledge the land, but what we really want is to have it back. That is the best thing. I mean, the perfect land acknowledgement would say, we recognize we're on your land here, and we took it from you, so here, you can have it back. Of course, that'll never happen. And so what other things can you do to give something back to the communities? If you occupy a tribe's land, can you contribute something to that neighborhood in respect of that tribe? So, if you have the money, you can build a park, you can do some sort of land rehabilitation, you can do something, but you do it while acknowledging that you're doing it for those people on this land. We're on this land and we're going to contribute to building up on this land. That's my opinion. And I think that would be a good idea. I mean, if you want to do a land acknowledgement, do it, but also don't just say the words, actually do something that actually honors and respects. Have some sort of ceremony, annual event or something that really recognizes the people who are there. Another thing that helps is learn about the people that were on your land. Right now, the land that I'm speaking to you from is the Tiwa peoples. And these were the people who had walked these areas around southern New Mexico and Las Cruces. This was their turf. They knew this land. They knew the lay of the land. They knew where to gather food. They knew the nature of how water flows and everything else. They just have a deep understanding of that. And so to recognize these people is one, to acknowledge that they exist. Not many of them are around anymore, but also, what can we do to contribute back? And the way I contribute back is, by educating others about them. And that's one way that I can give back. So that's what organizations do, not just say the words, but actually do some sort of action that actually recognizes that they understand where they're at, who came before them.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that for us. So we know there are difficulties preserving Natives' culture, and we know art plays an important role in doing that. So I really love storytelling now, and one of my favorite podcasts I listen to is The Moth, which is a storytelling podcast. And on one of the episodes, there was a story that Manuelito Wheeler shared where he spearheaded dubbing the Star Wars movie in the Navajo language. So are you familiar with this project? And if so, can you tell us what's the importance of these type of projects of trying to preserve Native languages and using arts and things like that to kind of help with that endeavor?
Yeah, I'm actually familiar with that. Not only did they do Star Wars, I think they've done Bambi and a few other movies that they've dubbed in the Navajo. And I like it. I mean, it's actually a language preservation. When I was an undergrad, was actually a key interest of mine. And I actually studied Native American studies. One of my papers was on language preservation, and it's important. There's a saying, part of my French, if it comes out right, but it's tied to Quebecois, and it's La foi est gardienne de la langue, and la langue la foi. And hopefully I got that right, but it's basically faith preserves the language, and language preserves the faith. And language is very important. Right now, you and I are speaking in English, and we understand immediately the context and deep meaning of the words we say. But if we were to say something in a different language, we might know the words and kind of translate those words, but we might not grasp the meanings behind the words, because the words and the sounds and the pitches they carry meaning besides just information. Again, I'm going to probably mangle Blackfeet. So any Blackfeet listeners out there, I apologize in advance, because it's something my grandmother used to say when, we asked her, how's she doing? And she would, she was in a really good mood. She would reply, "Sakapi," which translates roughly to dangerously good. And it doesn't carry, though, in the English, it doesn't carry that same meaning as what she's actually trying to convey. And so putting Star Wars into Navajo language might be good, but then is there any other deeper meanings? Because when you think about it, Star Wars is a deeply philosophical movie. It's a lot about spirituality going on in there. And the Navajo people are very spiritual people. And so are they able to convey the deeper philosophical, spiritual meanings of Star Wars versus, do you see the original George Lucas English versions? That's one thing I'm curious about. How much more deep meaning about these metaphysical contexts of the Force and everything else are they conveyed in Navajo? I like that, though, that the languages are being preserved. My niece is I'll just say it, my niece is Lily Gladstone, and she's probably well known by a lot of people for her Oscar level performances in movies. When she won the Golden Globe, she really made the news, not so much for winning, or I should say as much for winning the Golden Globe, but for giving her acceptance speech in Blackfeet. And suddenly, everyone's Googling Blackfeet. Blackfeet language is blowing out. Just everyone's very interested in the language. And I'm very proud of my niece for doing that. And it's the expression of the joy she had in Blackfeet. It was great to hear it. I knew the words, a good chunk of the words that she was actually saying. And just the level of the words that she was saying expressed her humility winning that award. And it was wonderful to hear that. So there are now efforts in Blackfeet to try to get us much more interest in get the Blackfeet language expanded. Simply because, again, it goes back to language preserves our faith. It preserves how we understand and how we see the world. And so I totally value the protection of language and other efforts to do that. It would be very nice, though, to actually get a movie that's actually produced originally on Blackfeet and then gets translated the other way. Lily has shared that story often now in her advocacy. Is old Westerns, when they had Indians talking Indians, they just recorded English and they played it backwards. They make it sound, get that English voice. Reservation Dogs has Reservation Dogs has an episode where a young child is taken away to boarding school. He gets kidnapped and shipped off to boarding school. And they have him try to hear English language. And, so all the teachers and everything else are just speaking this weird, crazy sound to him because he doesn't know English, right? It just sounds weird. Well, what it is they're playing the actors' lines. They're speaking in English, but they're playing it in reverse. That kind of a turnabout's fair play. I like that. But it just, if you don't understand the language, you don't understand that context, you don't understand the nuances, you don't get the meaning of what it is you're really trying to say. So I do like efforts nowadays to preserve and advocate the language and use it more.
Excellent. I was so hoping that your niece, Lily Gladstone, came up in this episode, so I'm so glad you brought her up. No disrespect to the other actors, but we were rooting for Lily so much, and we just love her. Shout out Lily Gladstone. So some of the challenges you talk about, language preservation, culture preservation even, it comes from a balance of traditional values versus contemporary life. So how do you navigate these challenges, and what advice do you give to other natives in terms of trying to navigate the challenges between maintaining your culture, maintaining traditional values, as well as obviously living in a contemporary life?
Gerald Vizenor, a guy I highly honor and respect. He's an American Union philosopher who I draw on a lot. And he has a concept called transmotion. Transmotion can probably be thought more in the broader world as code switching, the ability to just kind of switch your identities and move it around. Transmotion is just, that goes back to, again, what the elders tell you. Who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? It's not where you want to go. And if part of who you are means living, I don't really want to say two worlds, but in two cultures, okay? Because for me, I don't really like the word two worlds because it is one world. It's, you're in it at the same time. It's like that classic salad bowl. You're piled in with all the other items, but it's still one big bowl. And so now, rather than isolating each part, you recognize what each part is, and you just easily just kind of, okay, I'll draw on this part here to get through what I need to do, and I'll draw on this part. And a lot of this transmotion and code switching is basically being able to communicate. Now, how easy is it? Am I to switch and talk to these people? How easy is it to switch and talk to these people? In language, just to stay in that context, people who are truly bilingual, who grew up in an environment where they spoke one language at home, for example, Spanish, but they speak English outside the home, can easily, without trouble, not only speak the home language, but they can speak it with proper pronunciation, proper accents and everything else. And then they'll switch to the other language and they won't have an accent either. Okay. And that's the ability to be in transmotion, being able to move across these two different worlds. So as you're living your cultural life, then what is it you know about your culture that you can draw on, and your things that are important to your culture that you can embrace, value, and then able to just carry over to that other culture that'll help you survive, and vice versa. Goes back to that area. What is it you can go back to that culture? And I'm going to be a little more nerdy because I'm a professor, and professors are nerds with licenses. Is that when you look at Rogers' diffusion of innovation, everything you use when you're living in two cultures, you're just drawing what is good on this culture that I can carry over to my other culture that'll be just as useful, and vice versa. And that's an extension of the transmotion in that area. So how easily can we just move across, how seamlessly for our existence so that we can carry out what it is we're put on this world to do?
Thank you so much for explaining that to us. And I'm going to ask you a question that hopefully is not controversial, but it's a reason why I'm asking the questions, because again, I get a lot of questions from many people when it comes to consulting or just wanting information. And traditions come up a lot. But we also know that some traditions can be oppressive traditions as well. And some people are proud of them, and whereas other people, want to change them. So if you would, I'm just curious if when you think about Native culture or traditions, are there some that you feel perhaps need to change because they've outlived their usefulness at all? And I give an example when it comes to, say, American culture, right? People would call upon a lot of traditions that we've had 1950s, 1960s, whatever, right? In terms of women did do this or, African Americans did do that. But we know some of those traditions were rooted in oppression. And so those were some things that needed to change. And so I'm just curious if there are any that in the Native communities that you all talk about in terms of traditions that perhaps may need to change.
Their traditions are ceremonial, of course, and those need to be sustained. In terms of like cultural practices, taboos, and other things, when as I was reflecting on this, do I really see anything? No, actually, I think at least, again, there are there are 500 different tribes. And so I don't know every tribal tradition. So I'm kind of just reflecting on my current tribal traditions and what things exist. So rather than actually kind of say what needs to stay and what needs to go, I could talk more about the idea of resilience and the preservation of traditions are forms of resilience. I made an observation, and when I read Bind Deloria, he actually backed up my observation, is that when you think about tribal traditions, what are they actually? Where do they come from? What are their existence? Native American people have been placed on reservations about the 1870, 1880 is when about the last truly free American Indians ever existed. Those who have never contacted a white person or never been bound by a reservation boundary or been subject to a federal policy. Those who truly live free of any incursion from the West. And they're the ones who truly know traditions, what were. All the traditions we know today, we learned from our elders. But as I'm getting older, my elders have passed on. They moved on, and now I'm seen as an elder. But when people speak of me as an elder, and they look at me, there's Joe there, and he's got his gray hair, and he's got his wrinkles, and he's got his wisdom, he's so wise. I'm thinking, yeah, but I've only been around here since the 1960s, and I wasn't even paying attention until the 1970s. And so when we think about our elders before that, a lot of the ones I knew, my mom's generation, my dad's generation, they knew the world from the late 1920s, early 1930s is when they started, which meant they probably weren't paying attention until about the 1940s, 1950s. And so they were elders, but they only go back as far as terms of elder history, the 1950, 1940. And so those who really know, again, the real native ways, they go back over 100 years. So when we talk about traditions and things we keep today and customs today, how much of it is truly grounded in direct, recorded knowledge going back to the 1800s? And so that's one thing you have to think about when you ask about traditions and customs. What is it we've done? And then how much of it have we adjusted over the years? I mean, we didn't always have horses. We didn't always have guns. We didn't always have automobiles and telephones, but we have definitely brought in these modern things into our traditional ways, and we've adjusted. The Indian Reorganization Act of the 1930s set up our tribal government structures. And a lot of people today think these are structures, but they really aren't. They were prescribed to us by the federal government. What were our structures before that? And so that's when you're thinking about what traditions, what cultures and customs to keep, I kind of put it back on it. Which of these are truly authentic and how much of these are just based off of people who only can think back as far as the turn of the 20th century?
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with us. The question came to my mind because I do remember, and you probably remember much better than I do, remember the ceremony that we did a PhD project with Bernie. And I guess you were talking about the ceremony that you all did with Bernie, and he was sharing it with us at the meeting, something about like his wife either couldn't participate or couldn't move past a certain point. I could be misremembering it, but that retelling of the story that Bernie shared with us was one of the impetuses for mind asking about traditions at all. So I wonder if you remember that ceremony or what he was talking about then at all.
Fortunately, I don't remember that. I do know we gave Bernie a blanket honoring.
Right.
That's the
You
one
did.
thing we did. When it comes to women, I mean, there's some things, especially amongst the Blackfeet tribe, and we have our ceremonies, and women are segregated from men in terms of where they can sit within a certain place. And that's outlined, but that's more of a spiritual connection to keep things in balance, keep things right. And a lot of the things we do are meant to keep things balanced, keep things right. Even though, and it's basically a placement of sitting, it's not what roles they can do. Lily recently was honored by the tribe and received a stand-up headdress. And so she has this headdress that she got from a women's headdress society, which means it's nothing I can do. But then again, there's men's equivalents. So there are things that, even though we might have segregated activities, there's generally an equivalent activity for the other side as well that goes on in there.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's one thing you were asking, what should be kept with. So far, I'm pretty happy with the way things are done right now.
Great. Thank you for, again, clarifying that for me. I think it was the blanket ceremony that Bernie shared that, but I could also be misremembering some of the aspect of what was shared. But we do remember the blanket ceremony that was talked about at the PhD Project Conference. So let's talk about the future. One of the things that we like to say in African-American culture is that it's not just about our history, we have a future. That's the Afrofuturism aspect of it. And so likewise, Native Americans have futures. And so how do you see the future of Native American activism and advocacy evolving in the coming years?
Oh, wow. Now that I've gone around the sun a few times, I've noticed that things occur in cycles. And you can always put it into a classic sine wave. Things go up, things go down, things go up. And in the 70s, when I was a young child, American Indian movement was very big. A lot of things we actually have today was because American Indian movement really put Native American people to the forefront. The down cycle before them was Native American people were pretty much understood through only cowboy and Indian movies. And, it's like a lot of the white people were watching white people play Indians. No one ever did anything. And it wasn't until the A movement where Native Americans really started to come to the forefront. And my niece is part of that. She is, cadre now, Native American actors and film professionals who are making their own movies and putting that Native voice, and it's Native grounded and everything else. No, when they speak the traditional language, they are actually speaking the language, and they're speaking it correctly in the correct context too, not just saying the words. So in terms of that, the current, actually both of us, so the younger generation's influencing the older generation. That's one thing I've never been a big fan of, is always have the older generation say, well, the younger people will take over for us. And it's like, well, I'm still here right now at this very moment. So I still have my calling. I got to do my things. But I just now have more people behind me with a little more energy and motivation to carry on the work that I want to do. And so one of the things I've been doing in my advocacy is getting Native recognition within business academics. My own advocacy work was when I was a doctoral student and realized that there's not a lot of Native or Indigenous people being represented in the work by the Academy of Management. And so I created the caucus, and the caucus brought all of us together. And so we're being recognized now in the Academy of Management as a distinct, unique group of people. And we actually right now are applying to transform from becoming a caucus to actually becoming an interest group. We have our application in now. We're waiting on feedback from that. But if we, as an interest group, not only would we be a collection of people with common ideals, but we can actually guide the scholarship. We can define what is Indigenous research, what does Indigenous research mean, what do these values of ours mean, how do we conduct research in Indigenous ways? And then when people submit papers, because we're the Indigenous group, we actually have editorial oversight on that, and we guide that and we build that. That's a form of advocacy. That's how one way we can do that. And so Lily's work that she's been doing is basically getting people recognized on the screen to see Native people not just as side characters or background characters, but people with unique, distinct cultural things that are important for society as well. And so the activism right now, I think, is on an upswing. Where is it going to go? Man, I don't want to be a big downer, but right now, though, a lot of the world seems to be swinging right back to the, I don't even want to say far right. They're swinging back to the dark side. Fascism it's on the rise. And if they get in power, then that will knock, they have the power that can knock activism out of the way. And so how do you be active? You got to definitely have the courage to move forth and stand forth and face up those challenges and say no to those things that are wrong. If you have other ways you can do it, again, through my way was just getting voice for Native people. Oh, one other thing is we created IBAPA, the Indigenous Business and Public Administration Journal. And we actually, our editorial content that we insist that Native people write the papers to us in the way they would communicate normally. We don't want to speak in the academic speak. We want to talk in the way that is useful for Native people. And I have a paper in there that's Coyote Learns to Write an Academic Paper. And it's a Coyote story about academic papers. And so that's another form of advocacy. So for anyone who's an advocate doing this sort of activism and advocacy is one, be who you are, find what's very passionate for you, stick to it, do your best to not let people talk you out of it. If it's important to you, plug along. Things won't change instantly, but if you stay along, all the people who we recognize who have done any kind of advocacy work or activism work spent a long time doing hard work over years, but eventually things do change. And when they face great challenges, they still plug along. Don't let things stop. Because in the grand scheme of things, to go back to what we're talking about, the Navajo language for Star Wars and the mysticism of the Force and everything else, in the long run, good always prevails. And so you want to do what work you can to do good.
Thank you so much, Joe, for joining me in the guest chair today. Thanks for taking this moment to enlighten all of us about what we can do to raise Native Americans' voices. And this has been such a great conversation. I could talk to you all day long about this topic because you're so passionate about it, and it's just so much information that I know our listeners are going to just really enjoy it. So I wish you the best of luck in all of the future endeavors that you have.
Thank you very much. And I'm very honored for being invited, and thank you for giving me the time to speak with you. I was and the work you're doing here, it's great. And so I'm glad to be invited to be a part of your work. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Diversity Matters. If you enjoyed our show and want to hear more, please subscribe to our show, post, talk about, and reshare our show with all of your friends and family. And leave us a favorable review and rating so that it will make it easier for others to find us wherever they listen to podcasts. We could not do this important work or keep it going without you, so we really appreciate your support. We especially like to thank our episode sponsor, the PhD Project. Please support their mission by donating to the PhD Project. And if you're interested in a PhD in business, you can find more information on their website by visiting www.phdproject.org. If you or your company would like to sponsor a Diversity Matters episode, please visit the podcast section of our website at www.whconsultingfirm.com for more information. Diversity Matters is produced by WH Consulting, a firm that provides a wide range of management consulting and professional services to individuals and organizations. Original music produced by Sincere Morton Mary. Until next time, peace and love.